The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. When Jesus heard of the death of John the Baptist, he withdrew in a boat to a deserted place by himself. The crowds heard of this and followed him on foot from their towns. When he disembarked, he saw the vast crowd. His heart was moved with pity for them, and he cured their sick. When it was evening, the disciples approached him and said, "This is a deserted place, and it is already late. Dismiss the crowd so they can go to the villages and buy food for themselves." He said to them, "There is no need for them to go away. Give them some food yourselves." But they said to him, 5 loaves and 2 fish are all we have here." Then he said, "Bring them here to me." And he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he said the blessing, broke the loaves, and gave them to the disciples, who in turn gave them to the crowds. They all ate and were satisfied, and they picked up the fragments left over, 12 wicker baskets full. Those who ate were about 5,000 men, not counting women and children. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Well, we continue the saga of the Israelites' journey through the desert, and here we have them complaining about the food that the Lord has given them, the manna. And it's kind of interesting when I they ate manna for 40 years. That's all they ate was manna. And when I kind of read the description of it, I kind of understand why they were complaining. So manna was like coriander seed, had the color of resin. So the people would grind it between millstones and pound it into a mortar and then cook it in a pot, make it into loaves, which tasted like cakes made with oil for 40 years. That doesn't sound terribly appetizing. But anyway, the Lord fed him. It's a beautiful story. And he goes on to feed him, give him meat and stuff. But that's a prefiguration, right? The manna as a prefiguration was to come, which is ultimately the Eucharist, right? Our Lord feeds us. But here we have in the gospel, our Lord feeding the 5,000. He feeds them with some, loaves of bread and some fish. And so here we see the Lord then he's satisfying their physical hunger. And they're down with that. They're like, this is awesome, man. Here's a king who's just going to feed us. And we just have to hang out in little groups on the grass, and he's going to feed us for the rest of our lives. They're content with that. So when you see in John's gospel, he goes and feeds. He does another miracle like this. He feeds like 5,000 or something, and then he pieces out on the boat, and they follow him. Why do they follow him? Jesus calls them out. They follow him because he fed them. He fed them food. They don't have to work for their food. They just lay around and he feeds them. All right, but Jesus is still a prefiguration. Even today, it's a prefiguration for the Eucharist. When Jesus feeds us with his body and blood, all right, that's what we truly desire. Like this physical hunger, whatever. 100 things could satisfy it. Spiritual hunger, only one thing can satisfy it. Grace, right? A participation in the divine life of God. That's what grace is. And that's what we receive in the Eucharist. Like no earthly food can satisfy that hunger. But we being who we are, we seek it. We seek to fill this void of grace in our hearts with earthly comforts, whether it's food or things on Amazon, right? Only grace will truly satisfy. And the only place we really get grace, so the only place is through Jesus and mainly through the sacraments, here at the Eucharist. And see, grace, it's not magic. It's not instantaneous. It doesn't just, I got it. No. It takes time. It takes our cooperation with it. It takes not sinning. It takes choosing to grow in virtue and cooperate with the voice of God in my heart. Okay, but when we do, we nail it. We become fully who God's created us to be. That's what we're all looking for. Everyone, whatever they're searching for, whether it's in drugs, alcohol, shopping, whatever, it's all in a search for grace, and God gives it to us in the Eucharist, but we have to cooperate with it. So we don't want to grumble, like whatever, I come every Sunday, nothing happens. Okay, well give it time. Not only give it time, cooperate with the grace. Choose in faith to be open to it. Quit sinning. Choose to grow in virtue. Things like that, then we nail it. And we become fully who we created to be. Our hearts are satisfied. That's what Jesus offers us. All this manna, this feeding of the 5,000 is a prefiguration for the Eucharist, where Jesus feeds us not only with his body and blood, with grace, a participation in the divine life of God.